the rich, savory scent of roast turkey and sage stuffing, a scent that had been the official perfume of my family's joy for 50 Thanksgivings, filled the warm, loud dining room. My son David stood at the head of the table, carving the magnificent 20-pound bird I had woken up at 5 a.m. to put in the oven. Laughter bounced off the walls as my two grandchildren, 10-year-old Sophie and 12-year-old Leo, argued good-naturedly over who would get the drumsticks. It was a perfect picture of family, a Rockwell painting come to life. I sat at my usual seat, smiling, my heart full. Then, it was time to eat. David brought the platter of perfectly carved turkey to the table. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, followed with the mashed potatoes and the gravy boat. They served the children first, then themselves, piling their plates high. I watched, my hands folded in my lap, waiting patiently. And then, Jessica caught my eye. A bright, cruel, and performative smile played on her lips. She leaned over to the corner of the kitchen, where the dog's water and food bowls were kept. Our old golden retriever, Gus, had passed away 2 years ago, but they had never bothered to put his things away. She picked up his blue ceramic food bowl, the one with his name, Goose, still faintly visible on the side. She scooped a spoonful of lumpy cold mashed potatoes into it, ladled some gravy over the top, and added a few scraps of turkey that had fallen off the main platter. She walked over to me, her movements theatrical, designed for an audience. And in front of my entire family, she placed the dog bowl on the table in front of me. "There you go, Helen," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, full of a bright, tinkling laughter. "We saved some for you. It's all the same going down, right?" My son, David, chuckled. He actually let out a short, sharp laugh, as if his wife had just told the cleverest joke in the world. My grandchildren, confused at first, looked at their father's laughing face, and then snickered, their own laughter, hesitant but cruel. The warm, happy room went cold. The scent of turkey turned to ash in my nostrils. I looked down at the dog bowl. I looked at the scraps of food, the same kind of scraps I used to give to Gus. I looked at the smiling, laughing faces of my family, the people I loved most in the world. And in that moment, the part of me that had always been the good sport, the part that had always laughed along with their jokes, the part that had endured 1,000 tiny humiliations to keep the peace, that part of me quietly and finally died. And finally died. But I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not protest. A strange, glacial calm settled over me. I looked at my daughter-in-law's triumphant, mocking face, and I picked up my fork. "Thank you, dear," I said, my voice as sweet and as steady as a hymn. "You're so thoughtful." And as I took a single symbolic bite of the cold potatoes from the dog bowl, a new thought, cold and clear and sharp as a shard of ice, formed in my mind. I document this. They thought this was a joke. They had no idea I was about to turn their lives into a cautionary tale. Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Helen. I'm 78 years old, a retired English teacher. And on Thanksgiving Day, in my own home, surrounded by my family, I was served my dinner in a dog bowl as a punchline. The secret I am sharing with you today is not about a hidden crime or a secret fortune. It's about a secret I kept from myself for 20 years. The secret is that my family's love for me was conditional, and the condition was that I had to be their willing punching bag. For decades, I have been the target of their harmless jokes, their good-natured teasing. I was the family's lovable, slightly dotty, old-fashioned punchline. I endured the constant, subtle digs at my expense, because I believed it was the price I had to pay to be included, to be a part of their loud, boisterous, and often cruel world of fun. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I laughed when I wanted to cry. I told myself it was just their way of showing affection. But tonight, with the taste of humiliation still in my mouth, I realized the truth. It was not affection. It was contempt. And my silence had been their permission slip. Tonight, that permission has been permanently revoked. So please, gather round. This is a story about how a family's idea of a joke became a campaign of cruelty, and how a grandmother, armed with nothing but a secret blog and a lifetime of pain, decided to tell a story of her own. Your support your likes and subscriptions to Voices of the Forgotten, are the first entry in my own new ledger, a ledger of self-respect. To understand why my own son would chuckle as his wife handed me a dog bowl full of scraps, you have to understand the family I raised. You have to understand the years I spent teaching him, and myself, that my feelings were less important than the family's fun. Our home was not a quiet place of gentle dignity. It was a loud, boisterous, and often chaotic world built on the foundation of my late husband's booming laugh and my own endless patience. My Frank was a wonderful man, a big, gregarious bear of a man who owned a successful plumbing supply company. He was the life of every party, a man who loved a good joke more than anything. Our house was always full of people, of laughter, of his terrible corny puns that would make everyone groan and then laugh. He was the sun, and I, and our son David, happily orbited him. His teasing was legendary, but it was always coated in a thick, warm layer of love. He would tease me about my terrible sense of direction, or my inability to cook a steak without turning it into a piece of leather. But he would do it while pulling me into his arms for a hug, or winking at me from across the room. His jokes were a form of love, a way of saying, I see you, with all your quirks, and I adore you. I was the quiet center of his whirlwind, the calm in his storm. I was the one who made sure the boisterous fun didn't descend into chaos. I was the one who smoothed ruffled feathers, who mediated the loud, passionate arguments, who made sure everyone felt loved and included. I was the family's emotional shock absorber, and I was good at my job. I thought I was teaching my son David how to be a part of a loving, boisterous family. I didn't realize I was also teaching him that it was okay to laugh at my expense, that Mom was the family's designated good sport. David grew up in this world of loving, loud-mouthed chaos. He inherited his father's gregarious nature, but not his deep, intuitive kindness. He learned that making a joke, especially a joke about his slightly flustered, old-fashioned mother, was an easy way to get a laugh, to win his father's approval. It started with harmless things. He would playfully mimic my accent. He would hide my reading glasses and laugh as I searched for them in a panic. It was all just fun. And I, not wanting to be a spoilsport, not wanting to dampen the joyful noise of my home, would always laugh along, even when a small part of me felt a tiny, sharp sting. I told myself it was just boys being boys, that it was a sign of our familiar, easy love. The real shift began when Frank died. The sun went out of our universe. The booming laugh was gone, and in its place was a profound, echoing silence. And in that silence, David and I were lost. He met Jessica a year later. She was not like the quiet, gentle girls he had dated before. She was sharp, witty, and ambitious, with a tongue as quick and as cutting as a razor. She was a successful real estate agent who moved through the world with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. And she was, I see now, a predator who recognized a wounded and vulnerable family dynamic. She saw the hole that Frank's big personality had left, and she did not try to fill it with warmth. She filled it with a new kind of noise, the sharp, crackling sound of her own sarcastic, cutting wit. She saw the tradition of teasing the family matriarch, and she adopted it as her own. But her jokes were different from Frank's. They were not coated in love. They were dipped in poison. It started subtly. I remember the first Thanksgiving she spent with us, just a few months after she and David had started dating. I had, as always, cooked for 20 people. At the end of the meal, as I was beginning to clear the mountain of dishes, Jessica stood up and made a toast. "To Helen," she had said, raising her glass, her voice full of a bright, false cheer. "For cooking a lovely meal, and for single-handedly keeping the beige-colored food industry in business." A few people chuckled awkwardly. My mashed potatoes, my turkey, my stuffing. They were, I suppose, rather beige. But it was a strange, unnecessary, and slightly cruel thing to say. David, however, had roared with laughter. He was so smitten with this sharp, funny woman, so desperate for the laughter to return to his quiet, grieving house, that he did not see the mean-spiritedness of her joke. He only saw that she was making the room come alive again. And so, He laughed. And in his laughter, he gave her his permission. From that day on, it became their special, private joke. The endless, gentle mocking of me. It became the currency of their intimacy. They were a team, and the object of their team-building exercises was my own quiet, outdated dignity. It escalated over the years, each holiday a new opportunity for a public humiliation disguised as a roast. There was the Christmas they gave me a gag gift in front of the entire family, a gigantic ear horn trumpet. "So you can hear us better, Mom." The laughter was deafening. I smiled and pretended it was hilarious, while inside, I felt a hot, burning shame. There was the Easter they playfully hid my dentures, forcing me to sit through the entire family dinner, unable to eat, smiling a tight-lipped, gummy smile, while they whispered and snickered behind their hands. It was all just a joke. I was the joke. I tried to talk to David about it once. Just once. It was after a particularly cruel birthday party, where they had given me a subscription to a retirement home magazine. "David?" I said, my voice quiet, my heart pounding. Sometimes the jokes hurt my feelings." He looked at me with a kind of baffled, pitying surprise, as if I had just confessed to a strange, incomprehensible illness. "Hurt your feelings," he repeated. "Mom, it's just a joke. That's just who we are. We're a family that teases each other. Dad did it all the time. You can't be that sensitive. You're being a bad sport." A bad sport. The words were a cage. To protest was to be a spoilsport, to ruin the fun, to be overly sensitive. And so, I learned to be a better sport. I learned to laugh louder. I learned to smile wider. I buried the hurt so deep inside me that I almost forgot it was there. I became the performing clown in their family circus. I allowed them to define me, to diminish me, to slowly, piece by piece, erase the woman I used to be. Which brings us to tonight, to Thanksgiving. The teasing had become so normal, so routine, that they no longer even saw it as a joke. It was just the way things were. The dog bowl was not a shocking escalation of their cruelty. It was the logical conclusion of 20 years of my silence. They didn't think they were being monstrous. They thought they were being funny. They genuinely expected me to laugh along with them, to be the good sport, to take a picture of myself with the dog bowl and post it online with a self-deprecating caption. They expected me to play my part. And tonight, for the first time in my life, I refused. The week following that Thanksgiving was a masterclass in deception. But this time, I was not the one being deceived. I was the deceiver. I became the most brilliant actress you have ever seen. I played the part of the chastened, apologetic, and utterly defeated old woman. The next morning, I came downstairs, my face arranged in a mask of weary remorse. I found my son, David, alone in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and a guilty conscience. "David, honey," I said, my voice a frail, trembling whisper. "I need to apologize." He looked up at me, his eyes full of a guarded, wary surprise. "Apologize? Mom, for what? We were the ones who—" "No," I interrupted, my voice full of a practiced, self-deprecating shame. "You were right. I was a bad sport. I've become too sensitive in my old age. Your father, he always loved a good joke. I've forgotten how to take a joke. It's my fault. I ruined the holiday with my long face. I am so sorry." No, annoyed tie. It was the most difficult lie I have ever told. Every word was a betrayal of the rage and the resolution that were now burning a cold, clean fire in my soul. But it was a necessary lie. A strategic retreat. And it worked perfectly. The relief that washed over my son's face was so profound it was almost comical. He didn't want to deal with the messy, complicated reality of his own cruelty. He wanted the easy, comforting narrative that his mother was just being too sensitive. And I handed it to him on a silver platter. "Oh, Mom," he said, his voice full of a relieved, magnanimous forgiveness. "It's okay. We all get a little touchy sometimes. Forget about it. We love you." I had just given him absolution. I had given him permission to believe that his own behavior was acceptable. And in doing so, I had rendered myself completely invisible to him as a threat. He and Jessica went back to their lives, secure in the knowledge that good old Mom, their lovable, reliable punchline, was back in her box, her brief rebellion quelled. They had no idea that in my quiet, lonely room upstairs, a revolution was brewing. I am a retired English teacher. For 40 years, my greatest weapons have been words, sentences, the quiet, formidable power of a well-constructed narrative. And now, I began to sharpen those weapons for the greatest battle of my life. I bought a new notebook, a simple, black, leather-bound one, and I began to write. I called it my ledger of jokes. It was not a diary of my feelings. It was a forensic accounting of my own humiliation. I began to document every incident of teasing that I could remember from the past 20 years. I wrote with a cold, clinical precision. October 12th, 2008, my 60th birthday party. Gift from David and Jessica. A subscription to Air 8 magazine and a joke. Over the hill hearing aid. Laughter from all guests. My response, laughed and said, "You rascals, internal feeling. A hot, burning shame that made my hands tremble. A hot, burning shame that..." Christmas, 2012. Family gathering. They playfully hid my dentures while I was napping. I was unable to eat the roast beef dinner I had cooked for 15 people. David took a picture of my gummy, smiling face and called it the prettiest smile in the room. My response, laughed until tears ran down my face. Internal feeling, a desire to sink through the floor and disappear. In page after page, I filled the ledger. The small cuts, the medium cuts, the deep, gaping wounds. It was a painful, agonizing process. I was exhuming the ghosts of 1,000 tiny deaths, the deaths of my own dignity. But with every memory I recorded, my resolve hardened. I was not just writing a diary. I was drafting an indictment. After a week of documenting the past, I knew a private ledger was not enough. My story, my pain, felt so specific, so personal. But a part of me, the part that had watched the world for 78 years, suspected that it was not. I suspected that there were other women like me. Other mothers, other grandmothers, sitting in quiet rooms, their hearts aching with the casual cruelty of the children they had raised. And so my real plan began to take shape. I was a child of the analog age, but I was not a fool. I knew where the modern world lived. It lived online. I spent a day at the public library, teaching myself the basics of the internet. I learned about blogs, about social media, about the strange, chaotic, and powerful world of online communities. And then, with a trembling hand and a heart full of a terrifying, exhilarating purpose, I created my own. I called it The Last Good Sport. I created a simple, anonymous profile. No name, no location, just a simple black and white picture of a pair of old, wrinkled, hard-working hands. My hands. For my first post, I wrote about the dog bowl. I did not write with anger or with self-pity. I wrote as a witness. I described the scene in meticulous sensory detail. The smell of the turkey, the sound of the laughter, the weight of the cold, ceramic bowl in my lap, the faintly visible name, Gus, on the side, the taste of the cold potatoes. I described my son's chuckle, my grandchildren's snickers. And I described the feeling of my own heart dying in a room full of people who were supposed to love me. I titled the post, "We Thanksgiving Dinner." And then, with a click of the mouse, I sent my small, painful, and deeply personal story out into the vast, anonymous silence of the internet. I didn't know what to expect. A few dozen readers, perhaps. A few sympathetic comments. What happened next was a miracle. For the first day, there was silence. Then, a single comment appeared. A woman from Ohio. God, I thought I was the only one. My son calls me the old ball and chain in front of his friends. He thinks it's hilarious. And then another. A man from California. Tor. My kids bought me a walker for my 65th birthday. As a joke, I can run a 5K. It's been sitting in my garage for 5 years, a monument to their disrespect. Then, the floodgates opened. My story, my small, quiet story of humiliation, was shared. It was shared on Facebook. It was shared on Twitter. It was shared on a large online forum for seniors called The Silver Lining. Within a week, my post had been read by 10,000 people. Within a month, it had been read by 100,000. The comments poured in, a tsunami of shared pain and validating anger. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Stories of being the butt of the joke at family gatherings. Stories of being talked down to, of being treated as irrelevant, as a burden, as a child. Stories that were so similar to my own, it took my breath away. I was not alone. There was an entire invisible army of us. An army of last good sports. I had found my voice. And in doing so, I had given a voice to thousands of others. I continued to write. I wrote about the hearing aid. I wrote about the dentures. I wrote about every small, painful and hilarious moment from my ledger. Each post was a new chapter in the unfolding story of a quiet, creeping, and universally understood form of abuse. The blog became my life's work. I would spend my days enduring my family's casual cruelty, my face a mask of smiling, good-natured acceptance. And I would spend my nights documenting it, transforming my private pain into a public testimony. My family, of course, was completely oblivious. They were so secure in their narrative of me as a harmless, technologically illiterate old woman, that they never for a moment suspected that I could be the author of this growing online phenomenon. The irony was a constant, bitter, and deeply satisfying secret. My son would sit in the living room, scrolling through the news on his iPad, completely unaware that in the room next to him, his mother was a celebrated, anonymous internet author, a voice for a silent generation. The turning point, the moment the war shifted from a secret, underground campaign to a full-blown public battle, came 6 months after my first post. An investigative journalist from a major national news website found my blog. She was a young, sharp, and compassionate woman named Sarah Jong. She was fascinated by the raw honesty of the stories and the incredible, organic community that had sprung up around them. She sent me a private message through the blog. She wanted to do a feature story on the last good sport. She wanted to interview me. I stared at the private message. Her name and the logo of the major news publication she worked for displayed prominently. The blood drained from my face. She wanted to interview me. She wanted to put a face to the story of the last good sport. My secret war, my quiet, anonymous rebellion, was about to be dragged out into the bright, harsh, and unforgiving light of the public square. For 3 days I was paralyzed with fear. My blog had become my sanctuary, a place where I could transform my private pain into a shared, public testimony. But it was safe because it was anonymous. I was a ghost, a voice without a face. To reveal myself would be to declare open war on my family, a war I was not sure I had the strength to win. It would mean not just their anger, but their public humiliation, their ruin. Could I do that to my own son? Could I, in my quest for my own dignity, completely destroy his life? I spent those 3 days in a dark night of the soul, wrestling with the ghosts of my own love and my own pain. I read and reread the thousands of comments on my blog. The stories of other mothers, other fathers, other grandmothers, all suffering in silence, all being told they were too sensitive, all being treated as the punchline to a joke they were not allowed to find unfunny. They had found strength in my word. They had found solace in knowing they were not alone. And I realized, with a slow dawning clarity, that this was no longer just my story. It was ours. I had, by accident, become the keeper of their pain as well as my own. And to retreat now, to let fear silence me, would be a betrayal not just of myself, but of them. I wrote back to Sarah Jong. I told her I would agree to the interview, but on one condition. I would not reveal my face. Not yet. But I would help her find a face for her story. A different face. The plan I devised was the most terrifying gamble of my life. It was a plan built on my daughter-in-law's insatiable hunger for public approval, and my son's deep, buried, but still present, sense of familial duty. I replied to the journalist. I told her that I, the anonymous blogger, was too frail and too frightened to go on camera. But I told her that my son and daughter-in-law were my greatest supporters. I told her they were champions of elder rights, horrified by the stories they had read on my blog, and that they would be more than willing to be interviewed on my behalf, to speak out against the kind of quiet, casual cruelty that so many elders face. It was a monstrous lie, a beautiful, terrible, and elegant trap. Sarah Jong, a sharp and intuitive journalist, understood immediately. She saw the potential for a story far more explosive than a simple interview with a sad old woman. She agreed to my terms. The next step was to bait the hook. I went to my children. I showed them the email from the journalist, my hands trembling with a manufactured elderly fear. "Look at this," I whispered, my voice a quavering, frightened thing. "This important journalist. She wants to interview me about the blog, but I can't, David. I'm too old. I'm too scared to go on television, to have my face everywhere." As I had predicted, their reactions were a perfect storm of pity, relief, and a dawning, greedy opportunism. "Of course you can't, Mom," David said, putting a comforting arm around me. "That's ridiculous. You shouldn't have to deal with that." But it was Jessica who saw the angle. I watched the cogs turn behind her. Beautiful, calculating eyes. An interview with a major news publication. A chance to be seen as a loving, supportive, and socially conscious family. A chance to burnish her own public image, which was so vital to her real estate career. "But maybe," she began, her voice a soft, thoughtful purr. "Maybe we could do it for you, Helen. We could be your voice. We could talk about how important it is to respect our elders. We could talk about how horrified we are by the stories on your blog. We could do it to protect you." "You'll protect me." The lie was so audacious, so shameless, that it almost took my breath away. "Oh, would you?" I asked, my voice full of a tearful, grateful relief. "You would do that for me?" "Of course, Mom," David said, falling perfectly into his wife's trap. "Dear, we're your family. We'll take care of it." The day of the interview arrived. Sarah Jong and her camera crew descended on my son's large, immaculate home. The house had been cleaned and polished to within an inch of its life. Fresh flowers were everywhere. My grandchildren, Sophie and Leo, were dressed in their best clothes, their faces scrubbed, their hair perfectly combed. It was a perfect stage set for a perfect family. I was there, of course, playing the part of the frail, nervous mother hen, watching from the sidelines. The interview took place in their living room, the same room where, just a few months earlier, my Thanksgiving dinner had been served in a dog bowl. Sarah Jong was a master. She began with soft, easy questions. She asked David and Jessica about their wonderful, close-knit family. She asked them about their deep respect for the older generation. She asked them about the importance of family traditions. They were brilliant. They spoke in warm, glowing platitudes about family values, about the debt of gratitude they owed to their elders, about the importance of creating a home filled with love and respect. Jessica, in particular, was magnificent. She spoke with a tear in her eye about the sacred duty a child has to honor their parents. She was so convincing, so passionate, that for a terrifying moment, even I almost believed her. And then, after lulling them into a state of comfortable, self-congratulatory righteousness, Sarah Jong made her move. "I want to read you something," she said, her voice shifting, becoming more serious. "It's an excerpt from the blog we're discussing, from The Last Good Sport. It's the post that started it all. I'd like to get your reaction to it." She took out a piece of paper and began to read. She read my post. The post about the dog bowl. She read it verbatim, her voice calm, clear, and unwavering. She changed none of the details. The roast turkey, the mashed potatoes, the name Goose's on the side of the bowl, the son's chuckle, the grandchildren's snickers. As she read, a strange, cold silence fell over the room. I watched my son's face. The confident, articulate mask of the loving son began to crumble. A flush of a dark, ugly brick red began to creep up his neck. He knew. He knew the story. I watched my daughter-in-law. Her bright, compassionate smile froze on her face, becoming a grotesque, unnatural rictus. Her eyes, which had been so full of a warm, feigned sincerity, were now wide with a dawning, animalistic panic. When Sarah finished reading, she looked up, her gaze sharp and penetrating. "So," she said, her voice a quiet, deadly weapon. "Ask two people who so clearly value family and respect for their elders. What is your reaction to a story like that?" The silence was a living, breathing monster. It filled the room, suffocating, pressing down. David could not speak. He just stared at the floor, his face a mask of utter, abject shame. But Jessica, ever the fighter, ever the performer, tried to rally. She let out a small, shocked laugh. "Well, that's just horrific," she stammered, her voice a high, brittle thing. "I mean, it's almost unbelievable. What kind of monster, what kind of family would do something like that? It's the definition of abuse." "It is, isn't it?" Sarah Jong said, her voice still quiet. She then turned her gaze, slowly, deliberately, to me. I was sitting in my armchair in the corner of the room, the designated seat of the invisible old woman. "Helen," she said, and her voice was now full of a profound, gentle empathy that was all the more devastating. "Does that story sound at all familiar to you?" And in that moment, every camera in the room swiveled to face me. The spotlight, which I had spent a lifetime avoiding, finally found me. I looked at my son, at his crumbling, shame-filled face. I looked at my daughter-in-law, at her mask of pure, cornered terror. And I looked at the lens of the camera, at the millions of people who were about to hear my story. The time for jokes was over. The time for being a good sport was over. The time for silence was over. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and strong and ringing with the undeniable truth of my own pain. "It sounds very familiar indeed. That woman was me. And that family is yours." No. The camera kept rolling. It captured the sound of Jessica's strangled gasp. It captured the sound of my son's ragged, heartbroken sob. It captured the moment a family's ugly, secret truth was exposed to the entire world. And it captured me, sitting in my armchair, my back straight, my head held high, a quiet, forgotten old woman who had finally found her voice. The interview aired on a Tuesday night, during prime time. The segment was titled, "The Joke's on Us, a Grandmother's Secret War Against Elder Abuse." It was a masterpiece of journalistic storytelling. It intercut the footage of David and Jessica's glowing, hypocritical platitudes about family values with the raw, emotional comments from my blog. It showed their beautiful, sterile home, and then it showed a picture of a simple, blue ceramic dog bowl. And it ended with my final, quiet, devastating testimony. The explosion was immediate and catastrophic. The story didn't just go viral, it went supernova. By Wednesday morning, it was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. It was on every morning news show. The clip of Jessica saying, "What kind of monster would do something like that?" followed immediately by my voice saying, "That family is yours," became an instant, iconic meme, a symbol of breathtaking hypocrisy. The internet, a force I had only just begun to understand, descended on my family with the fury of a righteous digital mob. Amateur sleuths, fueled by a potent cocktail of outrage and boredom, pieced together their identities within hours. Jessica's successful real estate business, which was built on an image of warm, trustworthy, family-oriented service, was the first casualty. Her face was everywhere. Her professional website was flooded with one-star reviews. The comments section of her online listings became a raging bonfire of public condemnation. People didn't just want to not buy a house from her, they wanted to see her ruined. By the end of the week, the prestigious real estate firm she worked for, facing a public relations nightmare, fired her. They issued a public statement condemning her actions and affirming their commitment to family values. The irony was so thick, it was almost poetic. My son David fared no better. He was a senior vice president at a large, family-owned insurance company, a company that prided itself on its decades-long reputation for integrity and community trust. The CEO, an old-fashioned man in his 70s, saw the story. He saw a man who had laughed while his mother was served dinner in a dog bowl. He saw a man who had raised his own children to believe that cruelty was a form of entertainment. And he saw a fundamental breach of the character and integrity his company was built on. David was called into a meeting with the board of directors on Friday morning. He was fired before lunch. Their social life, the world of suburban dinner parties and country club gatherings, where they had been minor royalty, evaporated overnight. They were pariahs. Their friends, the same people who had laughed at their jokes at my expense, now crossed the street to avoid them. They were no longer the witty, charming hosts of the party. They were the scandal that everyone was whispering about at the party. Their fall was swift, brutal, and absolute. I watched all of this from the quiet sanctuary of my own home. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel joy. I felt a strange, detached, and deeply profound sense of sorrow. It was the sorrow of a surgeon who has just performed a radical, life-saving, but deeply disfiguring surgery. I had saved myself, but in doing so, I had been forced to cut away a part of my own heart. They came to my house a week after the interview aired. It was a Sunday afternoon. They didn't call first. They just appeared on my doorstep, two ghosts at the scene of their own haunting. They looked terrible. They had the pale, hollowed-out look of people who have not slept in a week, of people who have been living in the eye of a hurricane of their own making. I let them in. We sat in the living room, the same room where the interview had taken place. The silence was a thick, suffocating blanket. It was David who spoke first. His voice was a raw, broken thing I had never heard before. "You destroyed us," he whispered, not with anger, but with a kind of stunned, childlike disbelief. "You destroyed our lives, your own family." "No, David," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I didn't destroy your lives. I just held up a mirror. The reflection you saw, that was your own creation. I was just the one who finally turned on the lights." Jessica, who had been sitting in a rigid, stony silence, finally snapped. "A mirror?" she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly thing, stripped of all its former wit and charm. "You didn't hold up a mirror. You took a sledgehammer to our lives. For what? Because of a few stupid jokes. Because you're so sensitive you can't take a little teasing." "None." "It wasn't a little teasing, Jessica," I said, my voice still calm. "It was 20 years of 1,000 tiny cuts. It was 20 years of being treated as less than human, as a prop for your amusement. The dog bowl wasn't the beginning of your cruelty. It was just the moment I finally decided to stop being your punchline." "So you decided to become a monster instead?" David asked, his voice full of a genuine, wounded confusion. "You decided to humiliate us in front of the entire world? To get us fired? To turn our children's lives upside down?" I didn't do this to humiliate you," I said, and this was the most important truth of all. "I did this to save you, and to save them." I nodded towards the upstairs, where I knew my grandchildren were, listening. "I did this because I could not bear to watch another generation of this family learn that it is okay to be cruel, that it is funny to be disrespectful, that love is a weapon you use against the people who are supposed to be your safe harbor. I did this because I love Sophie and Leo too much to let them grow up to be like you." The words hit them like a physical blow. They had no answer for that. Because deep down, in the part of them that was not consumed by their own self-pity and their own rage, they knew I was right. They left soon after that. There were no apologies. There was no remorse. There was only the raw, ugly, and gaping wound of a family that had finally been forced to look at its own reflection and had been horrified by what it saw. In the months that followed, my life transformed in ways I could never have imagined. My blog, The Last Good Sport, became more than just a collection of stories. It became a movement. The interview had given it a massive platform, and the stories continued to pour in from all over the world. I had, by accident, become the voice for a silent, invisible army of mistreated elders. With the help of Sarah Jong, the journalist who had broken my story, and a pro bono lawyer from a non-profit organization that advocated for the elderly, we established the Last Good Sport Foundation. It was a small, grassroots organization with a simple mission: to give a voice to the voiceless and to provide resources and support for elders who were experiencing emotional abuse at the hands of their own families. We started a hotline, staffed by retired social workers and therapists who volunteered their time. We created online support groups where people could share their stories in a safe, anonymous space. We developed educational materials for families, trying to teach a new generation about the difference between good-natured teasing and the slow, corrosive acid of contempt. My quiet, lonely life was suddenly filled with purpose. My days were no longer spent waiting for the next casual cruelty from my family. They were spent answering emails, moderating the online forums, and speaking on the phone with men and women who, like me, had spent a lifetime being a good sport. I listened to their stories of heartbreak, and I shared my own. We were a community of the quietly wounded, and together we were finding a way to heal. I sold my large, empty house, the house that was haunted by so many ghosts of laughter and of pain. I bought a small, sunny condominium in a retirement community an hour away. It was a community full of vibrant, interesting people who were living their own third acts with dignity and with joy. I joined a book club. I took a pottery class. I made friends. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who saw me not as a punchline, but as a person. My relationship with my grandchildren was the most complicated casualty of the war. For a few months after the interview, there was silence. Then, one day, I received an email. It was from my granddaughter, Sophie. She was 12 years old, a smart, sensitive, and thoughtful girl. "Dear Grandma," she wrote, "I saw the interview. I read your blog. I want you to know that I am so sorry. I never thought about how it made you feel. I just thought it was a joke because Dad and Mom were laughing. But it wasn't funny, it was mean. I miss you. I love you, Sophie." Her email was a gift, a small, fragile seed of hope in the barren landscape of my family's ruin. I wrote back to her, and we began a new kind of relationship, a quiet, secret correspondence between a grandmother and a granddaughter who were trying to find their way back to each other. It was slow, it was careful, but it was real. So what is the final lesson from my Thanksgiving of discontent? It is that the line between a joke and a cruelty is not a line at all. It is a vast, gray, and dangerous territory. And it is a territory that is defined not by the person telling the joke, but by the person who is the punchline. For 20 years, I allowed my family to draw that line for me. I allowed them to tell me what was funny, what was acceptable, what I was allowed to feel. My greatest crime was not my final act of rebellion, but my decades of silent, smiling complicity. I taught them that my dignity was a negotiable currency, and they, in turn, learned to devalue it. I also learned that love, in its most desperate and misguided form, can become a cage. I loved my son so much that I was willing to sacrifice my own self-respect to keep him in my life. I was so afraid of his disapproval, of his anger, of his abandonment, that I allowed him to treat me as less than human. It was not until I was willing to risk losing him completely, to risk the ultimate destruction of our relationship, that I had any chance at all of saving myself. And the terrible, beautiful irony is that in doing so, I may have given him the only chance he ever had of saving himself. My relationship with David is still a ruin. He has not spoken to me since that last, terrible confrontation in my living room. I do not know if he ever will. The wound is too deep, his shame too profound. I pray for him. I pray that one day he will find a way to forgive himself, not just for what he did to me, but for what he allowed himself to become. Jessica, I have heard, has moved to another state. She is trying to rebuild her life, A life that is no longer built on the shaky foundation of her husband's family name and her own cruel wit. I do not wish her ill. I simply wish her gone. But my relationship with my grandchildren is a different story. It is a slow, quiet, and carefully tended garden. Sophie and I email every week. Leo, my quiet, thoughtful grandson, has started to join in. They are learning a new language, a language of respect, of empathy, of a quiet, gentle love that does not require a punchline. They are learning that their grandmother is not a joke. She is a person. And in their eyes, I am finally seen. My life is full now, in a way it has never been before. It is not full of the loud, boisterous, and often painful noise of my old family. It is full of the quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying hum of purpose. It is full of the voices of the thousands of men and women who write to me every day, the voices of the last good sports, who are, together with me, learning to say, no more. Thank you for joining me on this journey. It has been a story of great pain, but also of a surprising and deeply liberating rebirth. Your support has been a constant source of strength. If my story has moved you, or given you the courage to find your own voice, a like or a subscription to Voices of the Forgotten would be a profound honor. Remember that your dignity is not a gift that others can give to you or take away. It is your birthright. Do not ever let anyone, not even the people you love the most, turn it into a joke. Your feelings are valid. Your pain is real. And your voice deserves to be heard. Be well and be loud. I'll see you in the next story. Love, Grandma Helen.